Thank you all so much for joining me. I'm Chasity Cooper. I am Senior Communications Associate at Regional Plan Association. We are a nonprofit in New York City. And just a couple quick facts about me. Like I mentioned before, I am RPA's resident social media manager. I've been tweeting since 2009, blogging since 2011. I'm also a freelance journalist with bylines in Teen Vogue, Essence, Shadow League, Bustle, Elite Daily, and so many more. And if you are active on Twitter, feel free to follow and tweet me at the hashtag there. So just a quick overview of what I'll be sharing today. I'll give you all a brief overview of the history of RPA. If you're unfamiliar with what we do, I'll talk about the fourth regional plan that we released last November. I'll highlight the 5 campaigns of focus that we've been focusing on since the release of the plan. Give you all a quick snapshot of RPA's media and just a couple other things, how you can engage with trolls, and then we'll talk a little bit about some social media terms you might be familiar with or unfamiliar with. But at the end of that, I'll give you all a chance to ask some questions. And so just to start, RPA was founded in 1922, and since then we have been known as an organization that prepares long-range media plans for the tri-state region, so New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and that's really what we've been focused on. So like I mentioned, the 3 areas are New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, 31 counties, 782 towns and cities, and that's 23 million residents. So when we started thinking about the plan, we had to do a lot of looking back at the history of it. So RPA, like I mentioned, has been around for almost 100 years. So that means we have 4 regional plans under our belt. The very first plan focused on really just identifying, creating highways and connecting the region back in 1929. The second regional plan was a series of reports. So there were reports that weren't necessarily completed and put into a finite binding of a report. But those really focused on that was about urban centers connected by transit, public outreach, public transportation. It focused on a lot of different areas of growth for the region. And the third plan actually was more about the economy, environment, and equity. And that came out in 1996, which leads me to the fourth regional plan, which we put out last November. This was 5 years in the making, and the fourth regional plan seeks to address issues in sustainability, transportation, infrastructure, in identifying how we can be able to fight climate change, which is one thing that we weren't thinking about in 1996. And so there are 4 different thrusts within the plan, these values of equity, health, prosperity, and sustainability. And these help guide the 4 action areas of changing and improving institutions that we feel aren't being able to deliver for residents of the region: transportation, as I mentioned, climate change, and affordability. And one thing that you all see right now on the screen, when you are an advocate like we are, an organization that is focused on advocacy, we tend to our goal is really to garner a lot of media around the work that we've done thus far. And so over the last year, we've talked to a great length about the 5 campaigns I'm going to mention. And these are just a couple of the clips that we've produced over the last year in some different news outlets you may have heard: Crain's New York, AM New York, all across the region and as well across the country. And so it's really been a cool way for me to be able to share the work that we do and be able to really help amplify our work as advocates for so many different things in our region. And so now what I'll go into this year, because there were 61 recommendations within our fourth regional plan, we decided that we wanted to focus on 5 particular recommendations to focus on for our campaigns. And so in the next slide, I just share a couple of those 5 campaigns. So one of them is manage New York City traffic and fund transit and reform the MTA. I'm sure those of you all who live in New Jersey or New York, you understand that getting around is not always the easiest. And so one of our priorities this year as an organization is to make sure that traffic is being managed in New York City. Things like congestion pricing are moving forward, as well as the MTA is going to actually, as many of you probably know or may not know, the MTA chairman, Joe Lhota, just stepped down last week. So that was something that was definitely on our radar. And while we believe he had a great run in his tenure, this is an opportunity now for us to advocate for the MTA to really change some things so that transit is improved for the millions of customers that use it on a daily basis. Another one of our campaigns we are focusing on is expanding affordable housing throughout the region. Another one is support a regional coastal commission, which I'll go into a little bit more in a little bit, as well as identifying ways to dedicate funding to adaptation in our region. We also are advocating for a national park to be built in the Meadowlands, so in New Jersey. And finally, funding the Gateway Tunnel. I know many of you all have probably heard a little bit about Gateway or the Hudson River tunnels and how they're crumbling and they're over 100 years old. And Governor Cuomo took a trip down into the tunnels with some journalists not too long ago. And really it was quite shocking to see how these are tunnels that we travel through, whether you're going to New Jersey, coming into New York from Washington, D.C., if you're going up to Boston, that's how far the Hudson River tunnels stretch. And so this is a really critical part of not only our region's economy, but the nation's economy as well. And so we've been really forcefully advocating for Gateway to be built and immediately. So I'll take you all through just a couple of examples of how I've been able to use social media to heighten these different advocacy tools. So hotter than a New York City platform, like I mentioned before, one of our thrusts this year is to focus on improving public transit. And so this summer, my colleagues and I at RPA, it was a really hot summer day, and we decided to go measure temperatures in 10 of the busiest subway stations in New York City, and one of the warmest was as high as 104 degrees. So not only was this just kind of a legit temperature check, but it was a way for us to amplify one of the reports that we had put out earlier this year, and really to showcase why the MTA needs to focus on improving, not just the transit system itself, but also how people enter and exit the different subway stations, the cleanliness of them, people being able to breathe and experience a really important way for them to get to and from work. So that's just one way that we were able to just highlight the work that we do and use social media in a fun way to show our report in a different light. Because a lot of times our reports can seem a little, they are, fully engaged with, some political positioning, as well as just a lot of technical work. So being able to kind of break down what the reports really or what the depth of the report is using social media or using a fun activity like this was something that we were able to do. Another thing that we were able to do this year, I had a hand in, was create a video to explain why our region needs a coastal commission. And so this was a really cool activity for me. I got to serve as the vocal talent on the video, and I'm happy to send it around after the presentation. But it was an opportunity to, again, take another report that was super technical, full of a lot of terms that people may not be familiar with as far as it relates to creating a coastal commission and what that would mean for our region. So in 5 minutes, I worked with our former graphic designer. We created a video from start to finish, storyboarding, writing the script, recording it multiple times, and then we were able to share it with our stakeholders as well as the media, and really just reiterate the need for us to create a coastal commission in our region. Next, one of our thrusts is establishing a national park in the Meadowlands. And so earlier this summer, one of our VP of Energy and Environment, he was able to take a tour of the Meadowlands with a group of journalists, a group of different advocates, and it was an opportunity for people to see actually what it would look like. What the Meadowlands looks like, because I don't think a lot of people have had the opportunity to go and see how beautiful and vast it is, but also how we can establish a national park so that this really beautiful area is protected for years and years to come. And also, it's a way for us to really fight climate change and really build a barrier of protection for our region, because a lot of you may be familiar, but about 6 years ago, Hurricane Sandy came and just kind of, destroyed a lot of coastal communities within our region. And so establishing a national park in the Meadowlands would not only preserve what they're there to do, but also allow for us to really show that we're putting forth an effort to fight climate change. One of the things I mentioned earlier talked about building gateway and public for PEN. So again, reiterating the fact that we need to improve our transit system here in New York City and across the region. Earlier this month, we took a tour of the Hudson River tunnels that was not as up close and personal as Governor Cuomo's, but it was an opportunity for RPA supporters, other advocates, journalists to come and have a look and see for themselves what the inside of the Hudson River tunnels looks like and how they're deteriorating. So that's another way we're able to put forth our advocacy efforts through events, private events, and public events. And then on the other hand, Public for PEN was an opportunity that we held a public press conference in front of Madison Square Garden, not too far from the steps of Penn Station. And really launching this campaign was an opportunity for us to show that Penn Station also needs to be improved so that people are able to commute in a healthy and safe way. Fun fact, Penn Station was actually built to only hold 250,000 people on a daily basis, and currently 650,000 people go in and out of Penn Station on a daily basis. So being able to reiterate the urgency to create an opportunity for people to learn more about how they can lend their voices to something so important, such as public transit and being able to travel safely, whether you're going just to New Jersey or you're traveling down to DC or up to Boston. Penn Station is a central hub for it's one of the biggest transportation hubs in the country, and so given the fact that it's not conducive in holding a lot of commuters is definitely a problem. So we want to continue to advocate for that. And finally, another way in which we put forth our advocacy efforts is through op-eds. And so we reached out to a local business owner. She owns a cookie business. And so she discussed how congestion pricing and putting a price on people being able to come into the city so that those funds are raised in order for public transit to be improved would help her business. And so that was a way for us to, again, really reiterate the need for certain things to be implemented on the local and state level, so that we're bringing awareness to the need for improved public transit. And so that's just a couple of ways in which we've been able to really showcase how we're advocating for the different things within the fourth regional plan. And so in the next slides, and I'll share these slides at the end of the class if Suzanne hasn't already done so. But a reason why we use social media as a nonprofit, it's a way to raise awareness about the work that we're doing, again, monitoring and listening to our constituents in the general public on how they feel about the issues that we're working on, strengthening partnership with other organizations that we work with. It's a way to build community and mobilize supporters. So speaking of all the things I just mentioned, establishing a national park in the Meadowlands, being able to improve Penn Station, building Gateway, those are all ways that we've been able to use social media to mobilize people to lend their voices to making sure that these things are implemented in our region. And finally, another way in which we use social media is to fundraise and connect with reporters. So we're coming toward the end of the year, and we typically, or since I've been with RPA, we've used social media to amplify the work that we've done over the course of the year, but also to encourage people who may not be familiar with us to learn more about us, and then to also encourage our current supporters to donate and help us to continue the work that we're doing. And so with RPA, we use social media in a variety of ways. New staff announcements, report releases, blog posts on our blog, Lab. We use it also to create a dialogue with our followers, depending on if we've released a report, if we've been quoted in the media. I have the pleasure of seeing our comments on social media, both Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So being able to monitor those and engage with our followers. Also, we use it as a way to spotlight what our board members are doing and the work that they're doing as well. And again, like I mentioned, we use social media to fundraise and to also just show love to our staff and do that in a way where they're able to present their research and their work in a very conversational way. As I mentioned before, our blog Lab is something you all can visit on your free time. It's lab.rpa.org. And this is just another way for our staff members to showcase what they're doing. As I mentioned before, we have our staff write. I do a lot of the writing, and we also have guest posts on Lab, and people who are outside of our organization share the work that they're doing. So it's fun for me just to be able to connect all of these pieces and to be able to amplify the work that we do on a daily basis. Because like I said before, a lot of the research that we do can be technical, can have some political vocabulary that people may not be aware of. And so my job is to be able to distill that in a way that it's digestible for people who are just walking down the street and have a tough commute like I do, or any of the other thousands upon thousands of New Yorkers and New Jerseyans do on a daily basis, and be able to give them a way to learn more about how they can lend their voice to change. And so next, I'll talk about our persona. So I'm sure a lot of you all in this class, from what I've learned, you're learning how to use social media and use different tools in order to have an online presence for yourself, your personal brand, or your organization. And so I just wanted to provide a couple of ways in which RPA, how our persona online is. So For one, if you go to any of our social media channels, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the tone is fairly informative, warm, smart, and friendly. And that's something that in coming onto this role, I've been able to make sure that's a way for our followers to engage with us without feeling like this is a 100-year, very research, policy, and advocacy organization. They don't talk to anyone, and also just so that we're not talking to ourselves. So I've made that an a point for me to really be able to have fun with social media using GIFs or memes or anything like that. As I mentioned before, we use social media to keep our followers and our supporters up to date with the research, policy, and advocacy work that we do, as well as our upcoming events. We also work with our partners. I actually had the opportunity to work with the Center for Architecture in New York City. We did a series of events in alignment with a design exhibit that we had there for the fourth regional plan. So we had a number of different morning and evening talks. It was an opportunity for us to really showcase another part of the fourth plan that people may not have been able to see. So being able to tie all of that in together and promote that online is something I have the joy of doing as well. And then because we are very warm and friendly and informative, we always welcome feedback from those followers that we have. I know I've seen a lot of tweets from different transportation advocates, people who are super supportive of taking action on climate change, taking a look at our reports and suggesting we do X or suggesting we do Y. And so being able to take that information offline, sharing it with the larger team, and then we continue to move forward that way. And so in the next slide, you'll just see a couple of examples of how RPA as well as other organizations have used their voice. So the biggest one you see, League of Conservation Voters. This is a tweet they sent out last week after Election Day. Very, informative, to the point. They're congratulating a new congresswoman, someone who I'm sure they have a relationship with. So, very succinct, using a lot of hashtags to generate traction for this particular announcement. In the other, on the other side of your screen, you see a tweet from RPA where we're tagging NJ Transit, Amtrak, again, raising awareness for the need for Gateway to be built. I'm sure many of you all have experienced delays on NJ Transit, Amtrak, especially on the MTA. And so being able to tag these different agencies and let them know that not only are they disappointing their customer, but it's a way to really push for urgency for these things to come to fruition. And then the last example I have, a really fun example actually, when you're in social media and constantly scrolling down timelines like myself, you tend to come across different brands who are very witty and snappy and sometimes a little pithy when they respond to different customers. And so Wendy's, I think someone had commented on IHOP when they became IHOB and they started doing burgers. Someone had commented on whether or not Wendy's was going to respond, and so Wendy's gave a very quick and funny remark. But one of the things I think everyone should be mindful of when they are on social media, when they are using it for an advocacy, if they have a platform for advocacy, you're going to encounter people who don't agree with you. And so one perfect example that I have where I encountered a number of trolls, actually I'll give two examples. One, right after our fourth plan was released, one of our recommendations out of all the 61 actually was to shut down the 24-hour transit system so that there could be time to improve and make track changes, do necessary repairs. And so out of all the 61 recommendations that are in the report, many people only saw that one. And so you can probably imagine that our mentions for a week were just inundated with, this doesn't make sense. And New York is a city that never sleeps. How are you going to shut down the train system? And so we were just recommending, not completely doing away with 24-hour subway, the subway system, but making time at very low travel times, which are between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m., for the MTA to make necessary improvements so that tracks are, being repaired so that transit is moving slowly throughout the day, or transit is moving much quicker throughout the day. And another example of that that I remember vividly, we actually had the opportunity to have former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton as our keynote speaker at this year's RPA assembly. So, and she was incredibly gracious, incredibly amazing, shared a lot of insight with our audience. But of course, you have people who, not necessarily were there for what she might have been saying, although it was really great. Her speech was incredible. They, obviously, said things that were not necessarily appropriate. So again, my job is also to get rid of those comments that may not be the nicest, and be able to monitor how people are on our platforms. And so if you do happen to encounter a troll, which I'm sure you all will, everyone does, what RPA does, our goal is really to encourage healthy and civil debate. We never will, block anyone or unless we absolutely have to. But we try to really bring conversation back to a way that we're getting to the point of why we may need to establish something like a coastal commission or a national park in the Meadowlands, or improving transit for the 23 million residents who live in our region. And so to wrap up, I definitely wanted to just reiterate the fact that social media, as scary as it may be, it may be overwhelming, all the hashtags, all of the different tools that you can use to amplify your voice. It's a way for us to really create an opportunity for us to connect with people, not just in our region, but also across the country. I'm also going to, at the end of this telecast, I'll also share with you all the video for those who may not have been in the room or on the phone, just so you can kind of see everything working in tandem with the presentation. But it's obviously fun for me to be able to use things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to connect with our over 15,000 followers on social media. It's also a really cool way for me to get creative in how we present our research and our advocacy work. So like I mentioned before, since I've been at RPA, I've just been as creative as I could to really elevate the thought leadership of our staff, really, really talented, really, really smart people. And just to kind of change the view as, being a research and planning and advocacy organization, we don't have to be stuffy. A lot of people used to refer to us as a think tank, but over the course of the year, and that's been a lot of great work to my direct manager, Danny Simons, who is the VP for Strategic Communication. She's been able to really pivot at how we're looked at, moving from this think tank to an urban advocacy organization, and we're focused on really making sure that our region is healthy and there's sustainability across all fronts, and we're able to really put forth many of the recommendations that we put in the 4th Regional Plan. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Suzanne if she wants to go ahead and we can do questions and answers. Thank you guys so much for taking the time just to listen. I know I apologize again for not being there in person, but I hope that this just gave you a little bit of an overview of how RPA and other organizations who focus on advocacy use social media. Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me, Chastity?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Um, so if, I think the best way maybe is you can either unmute and try to ask your question, Chastity,
Yes.
or you can type in the chat bar on the bottom right and type a question to her. I had sent her one earlier during the presentation to ask her to unpack storyboarding a little bit, if that is an unfamiliar term for some of you. So we'll ask her to do that right now. And I'm going to mute.
Sure. So storyboarding, ideally, if you're creating a video or any sort of visual media, it's really a way to um, just kind of brain dump and get your ideas on the paper. So for us, when we did the Coastal Commission video, which again I'll send with the presentation as well as the link to this video, our former graphic designer and I sat down and really looked at the Coastal Commission report that we released last October and thought of the most important things that we needed to extract from it that could be visually appealing. So when you all see the video, you'll see that it's an animated video, and you'll see that he did an incredible job bringing certain things to life. So really, essentially, the storyboard is it's a grid. I could also send you all an example of that. And each frame of the video, we had to, the graphic designer at the time, he illustrated it, and then I had the task of writing the script. So taking important things from the report, distilling them a bit so that it was more conversational, and then making sure that they went with each frame of the video. So essentially, storyboarding is just really laying out your ideas in a format that would be align with how you would see it visually in a video or any form of media like that.
So can everybody, does everybody see how, with regards to your practicum, let's say, how that could be a worthwhile exercise? And Chastity, as she mentioned, will send us some sample or two. Could be a worthwhile exercise for you as you are telling your community story, as you are telling what you are doing. It's a way to get buy-in, yes? Would you agree? It's a way to inform people early on in your process as to where you see you're going. We know, we've discussed a number of times in class how important storytelling is to the field of creative placemaking. So storyboarding is a great visual way to look at something and to see how a story is going to lay out. Okay? Who else has questions?
And I'm taking a look at the chat as well. Let's see. Does more than one person manage actual social media accounts at RPA? No, I'm I'm actually, my boss has access to all of our social media accounts, but I wish I had my phone, I'd show you all. I am the only one who can directly tweet, upload things to Facebook, and Instagram. So if you all were to tweet at RPA or at Regional Plan, you would hear from me directly. And I tend to, like I said, stay with the very friendly, lighthearted, informative tone when I am engaging with people on social media. And thank you.
So are you suggesting, Cassidy, that sort of one person, it's better to have one person sort of in charge of all those things?
It is. I think 1 to 2 people. So our communications team at RPA, it's myself, our VP, Danny Simons, and our graphic designer, Dave Zakin. And so I'm the main person who does most of the social media work. My boss will, if there's something urgent that needs to be sent out, she'll either send it to me or she'll do it herself. But typically, I would suggest not having too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to managing your social media accounts, just because you want to be able to have just a very succinct voice. If you do have a team, or have people who are available to be on your team, I would highly suggest no more than 3 or 4, creating a social media guide for how those team members will communicate with your followers. Again, I can send all of these things to you all in a final email. I'll pass them on to Suzanne. But as you're building your social media presence, I think starting off, it's important just to have maybe 1 or 2 people who really identify with the tone and the voice of the organization or the brand, so that it's not too many different voices or different tones to confuse your community, your constituents. Let's see. Oh, this is a great question, actually. Tamara asks, do you think it's best to connect also to all social media platforms? Currently, the organization I work for does Facebook, and I feel like we're not connecting to the entire population like Instagram. That's a great question. So I think you don't need to connect to everything. I think years ago, when social media was really hitting its peak, it was highly encouraged to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and all the other ones that have probably fallen off since then. Like I mentioned, RPA, we have our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts. We also have our blog. I think the highest follower count we have is on Twitter. Yes, it's on Twitter, and then it's Facebook, and then our Instagram. We just started, I think a couple years ago, but it's been my job to really grow that. And really, it's just another way to show, photos of the work that we're doing. So whether it's like map designs or if it's a photo from a live event, that's really how I use Instagram. But Twitter, we have close to 12,000 followers there. That's where a lot of our traction comes from, and that's the platform we use. And while there are people who do connect with us on Facebook, I think a lot of our followers are from they're on Twitter. But to you, I think really identifying what's the message you're trying to send. Do you know where your your constituents and the people you are serving, are they primarily on Facebook? Are they on Twitter? They might be on Instagram. I would say, do a test run for maybe about 30 days to see, how people are responding to what you're sharing on social media. And this also brings me to my point to create a calendar, a content calendar. That's what I use. I also use an editorial calendar for our blog, but a content calendar essentially is just a list of all the platforms that you use, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and each day of the week, what you're going to share. It could be a photo from an event. It could be a clip from an article that your executive director or CEO wrote for Crane's New York business. It could be a number of different things, but I think that content calendar gives you the opportunity to, again, similar to storyboarding, lay out what you want to present to your audience, and then be able to stick with the schedule. But I honestly don't think it's necessary to be on all platforms, especially in 2018. I think a lot of us, Facebook, Twitter automatically come to mind. Instagram is a great way if you have a lot of visual content that you want to showcase from your organization, but you don't want to run yourself into the ground trying to manage all 70 different social media accounts. So definitely stick with Facebook is one, because it's super traditional. I would, give a try at Twitter and Instagram to see which one fares best for your organization and the work that you're trying to show. And if one works better than the other, it's fine to keep the accounts active, but if you see that Instagram works better for your organization compared to Twitter, then you want to put all of your energy to that platform. Let's see, next question. Do you have a specific process for distilling and breaking down the pertinent information from these technical plans? Do you work with the creators of the plans to better understand what is important? Yes, absolutely. So I do not have a traditional background in urban planning, environmental science, I am a PR and marketing professional. So it's super helpful for me whenever we have a report release to not only read the report, but also go to the writers of the report who typically are in the office and to ask them, okay, what are the 5 things we want people to know about this report? And reports can be as long as 120 pages. They can be as short as if they're a white paper, they could be a couple pages long. But because I don't have that technical background, it's super helpful for me to sit down with the experts themselves and get a sense of, what are we trying to convey in this report? And also working with our graphic designer to be able to convey those things visually. So I think one of the most fun reports, aside from the 4th regional plan, but we just released our the high cost of bad landlords. And so essentially what that report is about is in New York City, there are, terrible landlords who are just treating tenants horribly, but they're doing it at a cost to everyone in New York City. And so some of the challenges that these tenants face, and they're primarily concentrated in the Bronx, broken heaters in the winter, mold, roach infestation. And so our new graphic designer took it upon himself to really illustrate those things in a really cool and fun way. And so if you go to lab.rpa.org, you'll see a blog post that was written by one of our program managers. And one of the images is just like roaches crawling across tiles, which I don't think RPA has ever had a cover of anything with roaches. And so that's really a cool way to be able to, like I said, distill the very technical stuff within the reports down to a way where, people, if you see roaches on tile, you're like, oh my goodness, like that's not good. And that's obviously not something that tenants in New York City should be faced with. So really just putting a price tag on how landlords who are neglectful to their tenants and being able to showcase that. So yes, I absolutely sit down and talk with the writers of the report. And I actually just shared the link in the chat box, so you guys can take a look at that as well. Are there any other questions? And I'm happy to, of course, absolutely. And like I said, I can share an example of the content calendar. I'll send around an example of the storyboard that our former graphic designer and I used for the video. I'll send the link to the video. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the process for distilling things down, it really does come with and being a part of the report process. I tend to come in at the end of it, but I usually know when the report will be coming out, what to look out for, really kind of in educating myself on what it could be about, and then going directly to the writers of the report to be able to draft blog posts, to draft social media content, so that, like I said, it's distilled down in a way that our audience understands it completely. If they choose not to read the report, which all of our reports are available online on our website. So yeah, it's totally, if you are in a rush and you just want to learn like top level things, it's a way for me to do that. I think those are all the questions I have from the chat. If there aren't any other questions, I will turn it over to Suzanne.
Anybody else? You can ask directly, you can unmute and ask directly if you want to type. We good?
All righty. Well, Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Wonderful, Chastity. I think that will do it. Everybody has your contact information and can reach out to you with further um, information needed. And we thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much for making it possible for us to join you while you're away
Absolutely.
and for you to be able to present us and for us to see your lovely face and
Thank
hear
you.
you. And we just thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much.
Of course, and Suzanne, I will send you all the things that I mentioned along with the video and the presentation, and I'll be able to share that with you all. So you'll have access to that and to be able to view it. And like she said, you can totally feel free to email me if you have any questions.
And so when Chastity sends all of that to me, I'll upload them to YouTube. Okay? Perfect.
Thank you. Bye.